How's it going, everyone? Today's special guest is with Jason Kuhl, who is one of the top security professionals on the touring circuit, especially the entertainment industry, and one of the good people that I can kind of call a friend and kind of lead on towards for help and questions, especially as we navigate this crazy COVID landscape. So I want to welcome you to the podcast, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
How have you been? I know obviously our industry is kind of crazy right now, but you've always seemed like you're very positive, and I know you're getting back into the fitness stuff like I kind of am, so it's kind of cool to see you out there just trying to stay afloat.
Yeah, man, it's been a good opportunity just to kind of take advantage of being home and making up for the lost time with family and take a little bit of a view from a personal perspective as well. And like you mentioned, the health thing and improving on that, just kind of trying to find different challenges while sitting at home here that we would normally get on the road that we're not getting right now.
No, and it's one of those things cool too. I know we talked last week a little bit, but to have someone like you to kind of piggyback ideas off of or talk about kind of what's going on, I'm very fortunate to be working with or around people like yourself, and I think it's one of those things where as we kind of open back up and get back to where we were before, we kind of need each other, those type of people like us, to kind of let's filter out all the negative energy and all this other bullshit, and let's focus on being good people and really getting good at our craft, because that's what's going to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How did you kind of settle into the security world? What was the catalyst that kind of got you kind of thinking about it?
Well, I got my degree in graphic design.
Awesome.
um, uh, so I started doing security just part-time in college, just like a lot of other people do, back home in Wisconsin. And I got my degree and got bored with my degree and started to pursue security full-time. I kept the security gig once I started working in my field just for something fun to do. And the company I was working for was a nationwide company, and the Milwaukee manager came to me and said, "Hey, we got an opening for a management role out in Denver." So I showed interest in it and talked to a few people. And from the time that he told me about the opening to when I actually moved to Denver was maybe a week tops.
Wow.
So picked up and rolled out to Denver, where was working in venues out here, Mile High Stadium, Red Rocks, the Coliseum. A couple of the universities are around here doing the venue staffing side of things. I actually came out here as our scheduling manager at first, and that is a pain I wish upon nobody. Managing thousands of people on a game day for multiple events is a lot of brain damage.
Yeah, no, I know it's crazy too, because you're kind of, yeah, you represent the company and yourself and what you do, but the minute one of these people you schedule kind of messes up, or, and I'm not talking about 15 minutes late, yeah, it's an issue, but someone that grabs someone wrong or is drinking or looking like a fool, it kind of falls on you, and it's like, I don't think a lot of people realize that someone like you, your position when it comes to scheduling, like there is a lot of sleepless nights. And it's one of those things where I actually, sometimes when we do these cruises or events where it's 20, 30 people, I'm like, man, just if I can sleep for 8 hours and not worry about any of these idiots, I'm going to feel great.
You know what? It's funny you mentioned that. So, yeah, that is a tough thing to deal with. What kept me up at night was the single man overnight in the middle of nowhere, and that person doesn't show up for the midnight shift change, and trying to find somebody to do that at midnight.
No, it's one of those things too where just recently the client promoter, whoever, like basically said, hey, we have the budget for one guy in the middle of nowhere, like there's no street lights, like we have cases where cars try and park back here, kids partying, whatever, but it's like, well, for the safety sake of it, I need two guys. And so something like that too is kind of weird. But when you get the 30 minutes out, hey man, I'm feeling sick, I'm like, you piece of crap, like what are you doing?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So but so I did the scheduling thing for about the first year that I was here, and then I moved into more of an event manager role, so bouncing from venue to venue. And then that was 2003 that I came out here. In 2006, I moved to Oklahoma, and primary gig down there, still the same company, was working with the University of Oklahoma athletics program. I was down there for about 10 months and realized that I was more interested in the music side of things than I was the sporting side of entertainment security.
Right.
So in '07, I made a move out to San Diego and started working more on music-based events. I had a couple amphitheaters and arenas out there, and also when I moved out there, I got involved with the Coachellas, the Stagecoaches, and a bunch of other events that Southern California has, just to uh, round out, the resume, so to speak.
Right. And
Yeah,
it's what in our industry, it always feels like the resume is always changing in terms of clients, events, and every time there's God forbid, a shooting or a bomb threat or something where it's like it kind of rocks us on our faces. It's one of those things where we always have to adapt. And like we're the one part of the industry that you're kind of like you're always kind of working, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
It's tough for people to kind of process that. I mean, I know with COVID kicked off, obviously the whole industry was affected by it, but it's it's one of those things too. And promoters and whoever, security is probably the last thing people think about, but it's also the
Yeah.
first thing they try and cut to save money or whatever. And when bad stuff like that happens, you kind of realize that there is a value in what we do. And I can't stress enough the importance of continuously training and kind of making yourself better.
Yeah, it's something that myself and guys that are on the team with the current tour that I'm on right now, I've been talking about over this whole thing of preparing for what's ahead. A few of us went ahead and did like the COVID compliance training to understand that, kind of wrap our heads around that. I know one thing that we really grasped out of that training, like we thought for large tours, it was just going to be something that could roll into the venue guy's role.
Right.
Or if you're lucky enough to have two venue guys, that other venue guy could take it over. We realized pretty quickly into that training, this is going to be a one-man job because it's going to have its own advance of its own. Just like we do from a security standpoint, it's going to take one person to direct and run that from a touring side and make sure that the venue's compliant everywhere that we go. So it's if you try to do it with one person on some of these larger tours, it's going to be like you're doing double work.
Right. And some of the stuff that I'm doing now with the driving stuff, like you have to start worrying about the cars. It can all be car bombs. You got the guy that has to do the temperature checks. What's the protocol if a person in the group that came into the show has the temperature hit? Do you let the rest of the group in? What's the signage for the directions where people can walk to come in and come out? And it's very fascinating too, because even the EMS people, the local venues and cities, they still got to deal with the dehydration, the diabetic attacks, the heart attacks, the fight, the cuts, the scrapes. Now you got to add COVID to it, and it kind of really, it's kind of crazy how much it actually adds to it, to the whole process.
Oh yeah. It's a whole other beast to consider.
It's funny when you talk. I got the COVID compliance training too, and the other thing I did recently was this workplace violence training, because my company has kind of had to deal with some like termination notices, but with everything going on with the pandemic and people not working and no stimulus money and all that stuff, like people are starting to change to it. It adds a whole other kind of dynamic to, hey, we might show up to a venue one day, say whatever, Live Nation, AEG, wherever we are, and there's a disgruntled employee who is working all these hours or had lost their job recently because there's cutbacks, and we might have to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's this whole COVID thing is doing a number on people's mentalities and just mental state in general. You're seeing it whether you're driving somewhere or if you walk into a grocery store, how people are a lot more aggressive and a lot more tense and on edge. It's everywhere now.
Now, how when you do it with your client or artist, is obviously you're involved with the planning and safety, totally all that. But there must be another dynamic now where you're kind of like, okay, guys, this is how the dynamics change. Like you can still do your shtick or whatever you do on stage, but just so this is what's kind of changing. Is do you find that the artist is kind of receptive and trusts you to make the right call?
Yeah, I think so, and I'm fortunate enough. The current guys that I'm working with that are pretty understanding, and they hear us out. They know what they hire us for, and they're going to listen to what we're telling them. Fortunately, I know there's some instances where there might be a little bit of questioning or ongoing conversation, but it's always a constructive, ongoing conversation.
Right.
Um,
So one of the things, Jason, that I'm kind of curious about, especially hearing from you, is when you're kind of out there doing security in a local venue, what are some things you're looking for to make sure that your event and show goes off well? Or what are some stuff that you see you're kind of like you have to correct the local staff?
you know what? A lot of it really depends if you're in country or out of country. I've seen over the course of the years traveling that as a country here in the States, we lack training compared to in Europe, compared to parts of South America, compared to Australia, places like that. So, as sad as it is, our home country is where we seem to lack the most. I think that we found that even just being able to put eyes on a guard and seeing if they're engaged with what they're doing, whether they're standing in the barricade or helping people find their seats or working at the gates doing searches, you can tell right there from a lot of body language what exactly is going on with that individual guard's mindset at that point.
Right. And so I think for myself that I think you and I both kind of treat this as a career. This is what we do. We love people that do the event security. Some of them treat it as a gig. It's just a paycheck. So they don't put that kind of heart and soul into what they do for work. And I think there is a disconnect there. But I do come across some awesome guards. They're like, this is like these people get it. And it's cool to see that kind of enthusiasm.
Yeah, absolutely. You get your great guards, your people that want to be there, but you're right. You know, this might be someone's third job for the day, you know, and they're just coming from whatever the gig was before, and they're just there grabbing a paycheck. You know, when you do run into people that are having a hard time dealing with that day for whatever reason is, I've always tried to make friends with those supervisors and managers in those areas. And even if they allow it, and I always kind of precursor my conversation going into each security meeting, saying, I most likely will interact with your staff as long as it's okay with you.
Right.
You know, so if someone looks like they're, like I said, just down on the day, you know, try to talk to them, lighten them up, and, you know, see if you can bring them up a little bit. And if not, then you turn to the supervisor and say, hey, try to help this guy out. But trying to stay positive in it all, you know, because, again, you don't know what that person's dealing with from whatever just happened.
Right. It's one thing too. If you're CSC or which is mega companies that's global, it must be kind of tough to kind of find those people because you're always doing hiring fairs for 50, 60 people, which looks like every event. And so I
Yep.
do think they devalue the role of the security guard, the guy or girl that are out there doing the work because they don't put an emphasis on you're going to do this for $8 an hour. You're searching bags. Oh, okay. If you do have a gunman, hopefully the cops are right there because you're going to be dealing with it at the front of the door. So it's like I definitely can see anger. I don't know if there's a way to kind of put an emphasis back on these companies to kind of, hey, take care of your people and they'll take care of you. But I don't know. It's a weird dynamic.
Yeah, with some of the large companies, you see that they obviously take care of their managers and they care about their managers and they communicate with them.
Right.
Depending on the market, the supervisors may be 50-50 on whether they're fully invested on what they're doing. And once those supervisors lose draw, then that just feeds into the staff. You can see it spread like wildfire on where the supervisors are solid and making sure their staff is involved versus the ones that are just putting them on post and walking away for a smoke break for the next hour.
Right. One of the things in the security meetings I do, I always let these guys know, hey, I'm with a band that will stop the show if they see security not paying attention and I always, when it happens, it doesn't happen a lot, but when it does happen, I feel so embarrassed for that person and the security brand itself. I'm like, man, like these guys are playing to 15, 20,000 people. And that 1 second they see you on your cell phone or taking videos or it's just, I can't reiterate enough to people that would be listening to this. Like, you do have a responsibility to do your job. And these people are just humans. You might love the band. I'm a fan of bands too. But if I'm doing a gig, I got to do the gig because I'm responsible for people's lives.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's very hard to get people to invest in that mindset, especially with the rates that people are paid because it's such a cutthroat industry right now in terms of keeping your bottom line somewhat manageable, as well as paying staff, but paying them at a decent rate to not completely lose your profit.
Right.
It filters down with just how competitive everything is right now. And we see that from a staff side, we see it on a touring side, and you see
Right.
it in all departments too. This lighting guy might be the greatest, but you're going to pay 3 times more than what you would for that lighting guy from that company. So
Right.
we see it all over the place.
Yeah, I think we get fortunate when you have a tight crew that everyone kind of buys into the same kind of notion of let's work as a team, and that definitely works, especially when you are on an 18-month world tour and having some real long days to have those kind of that core group that gets it.
Yeah, absolutely.
How important for you is the relationship with law enforcement in some places like when we go to South America or Mexico or Europe where you have to deal with the local military?
Honestly, I feel it's more important than the local staff in most of those situations, depending on where you're going. But, there's places to be comfortable in, like you used, for example, South America,
Right.
and there's places to be on your P's and Q's. But, yeah, I think it's almost more important than the local staff down there.
Yeah, that communication is really key, especially when it comes to if you have to use a motorcade. Or I know when I was last in Paris, the riots were going on. Our hotel was one area, and we had to literally get to the venue and drive around and through this crazy protest with tear gas. And you're kind of like, well, who's the law enforcement contact? How can we get through here? Can we get an escort? And
Yep.
that stuff's very vital, man. A lot of people don't utilize that. They're too afraid to kind of ask for help. But if those
Yep.
resources are there, use them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's especially in places like Mexico and South America, hiring those local guys that we hire to be our go-betweens and leaning on them. That's what makes it easier, to instead of trying to have those conversations and not fully understand the conversation with the language barriers. So,
Right.
Yeah.
When you're watching the news, how important is it to stay on top of issues that come up, whether it is a protest or there was a shooting in the city or there is a huge whatever? Like that's for me, I find that I kind of have to stay in tune with what's going on in the world. And if you don't, you can kind of get caught up in the madness of where you are.
I mean, to be honest with you, that's the reason I have probably a quarter of the apps on my phone between the Twitters and the different news outlets and everything, just to see that. And even if it's raising a hand to a null event, at least it's raising a hand to say, hey, what about this?
Right.
We've learned as we've traveled, too much information is better than not enough information.
Right, and that kind of leads into my next part. When it comes to social media and threats or weird kind of stuff that gets sent your way or whatever from bands or even the crew, what is your kind of how do you kind of deal with that? Are you kind of reaching out to the local venues, putting out a bolo? Like, what's some stuff you're working on when you do that?
It depends on what clients I'm with, and if I'm working as by myself or I'm working, with a team of guys, it really depends on first qualifying that and saying, okay, we've heard from this person before, this is just a basically happy you're in town kind of note versus, hey, this is something we need to take more seriously, and we start digging into some of our higher ability background checking folks.
How important is a routine for you? Say you're the venue guy and it's a 30-city tour in the States and you have 2 shows, day off, show, whatever it is, something where it's not too strenuous. Do you find that having a routine every day makes that job easier for you?
Oh yeah, without a doubt, because you find when you start a tour, you get into the first week or 2 weeks worth of shows, and you're trying to work out what I like to call my hiccups. Right? How to produce passes quicker, how to get guards briefed and ready. Just getting general information printed out to hand out to the guards each day, and you dial that stuff in as you come, and as we kind of joke, you figure it out by the time the tour is over, right?
Right.
But routine is huge. And then that being said, routine on an off day is huge as well. Starting to get more into the making sure the crew has go-to information for if something has on an off day as well. So typically knocking that out on the last show night before that off day and getting that information out there as well. So it all rolls together. from the time you get off the bus on that first show day all the way through the time you get on the plane to go home at the end of that run.
Right.
Yeah.
How important is it to kind of keep or establish some sort of command when it comes to the crew? Because I've dealt with crew guys who will post what hotel we're at, or they will say, "Hey, we're going to dinner here," or they'll post something, or they'll show a room key or hotel room key, or they'll be like, "Oh, just landed at this airport," and stuff like that. You do have to be cognizant of that, right?
Yeah, especially nowadays with more that's going on in the world. It's all brought up typically in my first security meeting that we do at production rehearsals, and usually kind of let it lie at that point. Fortunately, had some crew that listens, and you have everybody every once in a while that you're going to have to speak to someone. But been pretty lucky, knock on something, that it stays that way.
Right.
But I've been pretty lucky with people understanding the climate of what we're living in right now.
Have you done any of those theme cruises yet?
I have.
Okay,
Yes.
so and one of those things where obviously the principles stay the same whether it's land based or ocean based, but people are always fascinated when I tell them that, hey, I'm doing this EDM cruise or this rock cruise. They're like, well, what's so hard about it? There is once you get that open water, like you do have to understand how the coastal security, like who has jurisdiction, how the brig works. God forbid you have to use that. And
Yep.
I find those are actually kind of a little more hectic because you're so isolated and you literally are all floating in one little box.
Yeah. Well, and the ones that I've done haven't been from the artist standpoint, they've been from the venue standpoint. So it's a lot more of understanding. First off, there's so many people running around working on those things, understanding what your role is, in conjunction with ship security and port security, depending on where you're going into, what country you're going into. And there's a lot of lines that can be blurred in a situation like that you would think could be more controllable, being on, like you said, a smaller environment. It's really a bigger beast to handle than going in and out of an amphitheater each day.
What are some of the difficult things about doing like a stadium tour for you?
I think the hardest thing is probably just logistically. Getting from point A to point B. I know one artist I was with for a while. We did baseball stadiums consistently for about 3 years, where we were doing 10 to 12 of them every summer. To the point where I was getting a bike to be able to get around, and I was bringing out a second venue guy to help deal with that. It's really the logistical moving from point A to point B. There's some stadiums like the Fenway Park up in Boston where your dressing rooms are on one side of the stadium from where the buses are, but once the concourses are open, you can't get to your dressing room. So logistical is probably the number one issue. The advances usually go pretty well because they're big professional stadiums and they don't do a lot of shows, so they want to put the best foot forward for you.
Right.
But yeah, I think everything else kind of falls into place.
When there's an event that's, say, like the Las Vegas shooting or Bataclan or Manchester, events like that, do you find yourself as a professional and expert in your field that you kind of Monday quarterback? And I don't mean that in the sense of, well, I would do this, because I think a lot of these instances you can't really stop them until they happen, and you kind of mitigate the risk next time. But when those happen, do you take notes? Are you kind of like call your guys or girls and be like, hey, what if we did this? Or how important is it to kind of recover from something like that and work as a team to kind of prevent it again?
Yeah, it definitely turns into an open conversation. Whether it's people that I'm touring with immediately at that moment, or just friends in general, our network in general, and how all of us communicate, just to bounce ideas off each other to safeguard as best as we can against that happening, to us. I think the saying that you never know how you're going to react until something actually happens is never more true in those kind of situations. But how you react is and how you have everybody around you prepared to react is what makes the difference.
Right. Do you think ego is healthy in our industry? And do you think there is a disconnect sometimes where some people have been doing it for so long where they get kind of, I guess, gray in the tooth, but they don't want to adapt to the times and they still want to be that guy back from the 80s that was doing security?
I think ego is damaging, but confidence is good.
Right. So, like, how do you differentiate that? Because I think you're 100% correct. It's just it's you. Sometimes I see people that have so much ego. It's like if you're not willing to learn or ask for help or work with your team or kind of adapt to the situation, it seems like you're just like you're not better than the craft.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think confidence plays into willing to have those open conversations where if you have ego more than confidence, you're going to scoff at any suggestion that's put out there. And like you said, you're going to stick with what worked back in the 80s or 90s versus what works now or what is realistic now.
Right. One of the things I've always kind of harped on is people that they kind of treat this industry like it's all glorious, like oh, your red carpets, events, plaques, all this stuff. But the days are actually the days that are mundane are actually the good days for you, like you and I.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
a lot of times, people I think don't realize that we do a lot of steps, a lot of sitting around, a lot of watching the same elevator or walking around the venues. And so, how do you kind of are there some days where you kind of find yourself in a funk? Like, how do you kind of get out of that? If you're like, man, I've walked around this venue 30 times already today. I'm still 4 hours before doors. I'm losing my mind. Like, how do you kind of like help yourself get out of that stuff?
Usually it's I like to chat with our crew, especially most of the time my role falls into being a venue guy.
Yep.
I'll go and spend time hanging out with our audio guys, our video guys. Joke and have a personality. Be able to talk to them and like you had mentioned the close knit crew earlier. You kind of each have a way to pick each other up and keep each other going for sure.
Yeah, I definitely find that if you can be human and be like just a good person and laughing and like these are all brothers and sisters you actually have to live with on the
Yeah.
road. And the minute you start bringing in those negative feelings, or maybe you're just a prick, maybe that's your character flaw or whatever. But
Yep.
I do think you're starting to get to the point now where, especially with COVID and how we bounce back from it, where those type of people, if you don't get line and be a team player, like I think you're slowly going to filter yourself out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's the industry is becoming more and more of that team, type of environment where I think even with COVID going on right now, and we've seen on some of the Facebook pages and that where people blast people for doing whatever they're doing right now, and it might not end well for some of those people that want to put their opinions.
Yeah, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I've never been on it, but I do I do follow a page that makes fun of those people, and I'm just like, man, like you can't have it both ways. Like, what do you want for the like? You're mad at these people for working who got the COVID compliance, that got this training, that have a job or a specific skill that is able to go out and do stuff with artists. Why are you being a prick to those people? It's just very, I don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's social media gets you eventually.
Yeah, no, it's sad too because there's some good people out there that kind of succumb to it, and again, we don't know what people go through at home or mental
Yeah.
health issues or family. Like, so I totally I sympathize with that, but you could still be a professional, and I wouldn't know what's going on if you're a professional. And that's the way it should be.
Right. Yep.
What are some of your goals moving forward in this industry? Is there certain stuff you want to do? Do you want to start writing articles? Do you want to start creating these crazy syllabuses? Like, what are some goals you have for yourself?
There's been conversations recently with a few other people about training stuff. Like I had mentioned the training and how we're lacking, especially here in the States. There's been a conversation about creating like a staff training syllabus or course
Yep.
to administer. There's also been a conversation about getting touring guys on the same page too. Obviously there's their companies out there that have their way of doing things. There's a lot of us that are independent that are eventually looking to just to have consistency from tour to tour. We don't necessarily have to work for the same paycheck, but at least get some consistency across the board from my camp to your camp to this camp to.
Right. Like, why can't if we're doing a 4-band bill stadium tour, those production rehearsals, why are we all doing CPR? Why aren't we
Right.
all taking a fire extinguisher, a basic fire safety class, EMT, something where we can all kind of group bond together? But those are all life-saving skills that I mean, I can't tell you the number of times it's just crazy I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. So, like I said, that was born out of the frustration with seeing the local staff and trying to lift things up there, and then just evolving into the tour side. Really the bottom line is just trying to keep everybody safe and keep us all going home to our families at the end of the day. And some basic training can really help manage that.
Right. If a guy or girl came up to you and was like, "Hey, Jason, I want to get in the security world. I like what you do. I'd love to do what you do." What advice are you giving them? And kind of what are you is there any, say your kids or whatever wanted to be what you wanted to be, or maybe even get law enforcement, something security related. What are you okay with that? Or is there what do you tell you one side or the other?
So if somebody comes up and says, "Hey, want to get into touring, how does that work?" I pride myself on the fact that I started from the ground up. So I started as a yellow shirt guy at the gate out in the middle of nowhere and worked my way into where I'm at right now. So it's a lot of time put in, and I hate using time served, so to speak, as
Right.
I've earned this, but it is definitely a lot of time put in. But it's a lot of networking. It's a lot of being personable and a lot about just making and understanding the relationships that you are making along the way.
Right.
That's the only reason I got to where I'm at is I am friends with everybody that I've gotten gigs through, and the reason that's good is just because we've worked well together. We realize that, and we built on that.
You brought up a good point when it comes to when you kind of just holding. Yeah, man, you do it's great. Like I have so many ideas and stuff going on every day, and it's cool to kind of hear it coming from someone like you that I look up to, and a counterpart where you totally get it, and it's refreshing to hear it, man.
Yeah, it's just trying to stay on top of it, stay in front of everything as much as we can. Try to be on that leading edge, whatever that leading edge is.
Right. So as kind of, what are your plans? I know we kind of talked off the record when it comes to what you got for work coming up, but are you anxious to get back out there? Obviously you are, but in the sense of kind of seeing how the world will react to these new shows and this idea of pods. And I know we're doing drive-ins now, but there's a lot of concepts and ideas I'm sure you're aware of that this is going to be the new show for the time being. So are you excited to kind of get out there and be at the forefront of that?
I am, yes. Looking forward to getting back out there. Right now, current client, we're slated to go out back starting the end of April, and that's not in the country here yet. That'd be in Japan and Australia and New Zealand. So I'm curious to see what that's going to look like as we start preparing to advance those shows. But the other part of me is curious is it going to be consistent from country to country?
Right.
And that country to country thing might be a little more manageable going from like Japan to New Zealand and Australia versus hopping countries in Europe like what we hop states here in the US, and if there's going to be different variations of restrictions from country to country. So I'm very curious, I think would be the right word.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to see you out there again, and I appreciate you jumping on here with me. This was a good thing, and I think a lot of people are going to be appreciative of what you had to say. And for those that want to kind of get into the security world, listen to people like Jason who know what they're talking about. They actually put the time in. I think a lot of people can kind of take a couple of classes online or take this training where it's like, okay, it's cool. You paid to get the training, you got the training, but the hands-on and actually doing it from the ground up and working in the trenches, it's going to make a world of difference. And you're always learning too. So that's what's great about it.
Yeah, we never stop learning in this industry.
So thank you, Jason, and I look forward to hearing from you again.
Thanks, brother. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.